Hello and welcome to another episode of the Liberalish podcast. I'm your co-host Marcus. You'll hear from Keith, Carly, and Ryan in a few. We recorded this episode on Sunday, December 20th. It's our 14th episode and our last one for 2020. We started this podcast talking about it at least back in September, and we've been doing it ever since, and we've been pretty consistent with it, and we're going to just take a break to kind of recalibrate and make sure that we're giving you guys the best show that we can when we come back in January. I think we'll record again on January 10th, the second week of the month. So you'll get to hear us talk about the Georgia runoffs, the counting of the electoral votes, and I guess some more Trump machinations or ending a crybaby about the election that he lost. He's now trying to steal unsuccessfully, and whatever else happens between now and then. For this week's show, we talked about the continued shifts in support for political parties, where we're seeing non-white voters shift to the right in supporting Trump, and what that means, for the future of as we're Democrats or independents, at least on this show, and what's that going to mean for our party? What are we going to fight for? What are the things that are going to kind of enable us to enact things that we really care about? As race becomes less important and education levels, class, where you live become increasingly more salient for what we're trying to, for reaching out to other people and getting them to become a part of your caucus, if you will. Another thing we touched on with right after is the idea that's, or not even an idea, but that Black Americans that were found to donate a higher share of their wealth than whites for philanthropic causes, which for me at least, something that I've always heard from other sources is that Black people don't invest in their communities enough, and that's why they are the way that they are. There just isn't a care, which I think a report like this is great to read because it just flies in the face of that. So we discussed the implications of that report and what it means for our community and some other things that are tangentially related as well. Then we moved on to the Biden transition team and some more cabinet picks that came out and what that means for him going forward. It was really a quietly, comparatively speaking, but it was cool to see that Congresswoman Deb Haaland from New Mexico is going to be the first Native American cabinet member if she's confirmed to lead the Department of Interior. Hopefully that gets done. It would be really great to see another first take place. But yeah, we discussed that, and I guess that kind of led into a discussion of this continued polarization that we're seeing in not just Congress, but really, throughout the country. And this comes from, Rush Limbaugh, the big bad radio guy, conservative radio host. He asserted earlier this week that liberals and conservatives cannot peacefully coexist together. And it's Rush Limbaugh, right or wrong, when he puts an idea out like that, you kind of want to take notice. And I think that's one thing that I think a lot of liberals might agree with him with. I certainly have been leaning that way because I don't know if we're occupying two different realities. If we don't see things the same way, I don't know how we're going to be able to tackle the big problems of our time. Especially if they're kind of disregarded so easily. By Republicans, by conservatives. I don't know how we can work together. You know what I mean? So we touched on that as well to kind of round out the show. But yeah, that's, the next voices you'll hear will be, Kev, Keith, Carly, Ryan, and, that'll be episode 14. So enjoy.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Liberalish podcast. A couple of housekeeping items here to knock off. So one, this is going to be our last podcast of the year. We're going to be taking our first extended break. We're going to be back on January 10th, hopefully, to announce that Georgia went fully blue. Hopefully.
Fingers crossed, man.
Fingers crossed, whatever. We're just hoping that Georgia does the right thing twice. We're expecting a lot out of that state, but, hopefully. Also, another thing to announce, we loved Ryan so much, we decided to bring it back again. So shout out to Ryan, our social media guy. Again, if you have any issues with our Twitter account, he's the guy that you yell at, not us.
You know the vibe.
And, guys, let's just kick it over to the headlines here. So first things first, back to blue. This might come as a shock to everyone here in the podcast, but the New York City Department of Investigations found that the NYPD exacerbated already fraught tensions with protesters. And it said that some police officers engaged in actions that were at minimum unprofessional and at worst unjustified excessive force or abuse of authority. I was just blown away and shocked by this, and I thought they acted very professional during the Black Lives Matter hearings. But apparently, the New York City Department of Investigations felt otherwise. Of course, the commissioner came out and said this is wrong, this is lies. They acted very professional, but you know, New York City says otherwise.
What else is he gonna say? Of course, he's gonna defend his guy. He's not gonna say, "Oh man, that investigation was right." Yeah, we have to fix things. They never do that. No police chief. I can't remember a police chief. Maybe you guys know better than I do, but I can't think of a police chief that's ever said, "Oh, you know what? This investigation, this report on what we're doing is right. We need to go and fix our conduct. We need to go and do a whole reformation, just kind of revisit everything that we're doing from the top down and fix this."
Right.
Do you guys know of one? Because I can't think of one off the top of my head. We've had at least, in my lifetime, it's been, I think, for 20 years, police misconduct has been a major thing. But maybe you guys know different.
Well, I've been alive a lot. Well, not a lot, but I've been alive.
Yeah, made me feel old.
Yeah, she just called us old, Marcus.
She just called me an old bitch. Okay.
I agree. I think accountability and the NYPD do not go in the same sentence. It's almost like it's impossible for them to hold. And again, like, are we shocked? No. It's kind of like just one of those things that you read about and you just keep going because it's like, wow, like again. And I don't think we'll ever. I don't foresee like we ever getting one because it's just like if they continue to do it, even if like policy change, they just go around it. They find a way to just abuse their power. So, I mean, it's like typical.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of shocked. Like, I thought like ramming a police car through peaceful protesters was a part of the department policies. So I was like kind of shocked that wasn't.
I shouldn't have laughed, but that's funny.
It's sad. It's sad that we're laughing.
Yeah, like it's not funny, but it's kind of funny.
It's like just
Yeah, it's ridiculous. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, like my whole thing is like the mayor came out and he was like, "Oh man, like we gotta do better." It's like we've been telling you this the moment you got elected that the NYPD had problems, but it is what it is. I don't think much is going to come out from that investigation, to be honest. But it is nice to see that there is like some type of independent reporting from the government of New York City that's showing that change does need to be made there.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so going across the pond here, the UK has reported a new strain of the coronavirus. This has already caused the Queendom to go into a lockdown and has resulted in other EU nations to further isolate itself from the island. I think the last reporting I saw that said that the COVID-19 vaccines are going out right now. It should still work with this new strain, but we'll see. It's pretty scary that we're getting like a new mutated virus now, so late into the game.
I just seen the news. I guess their chief medical officer, Professor Whitty, had basically told them like, if you packed your bags for Christmas, you can go ahead and unpack it.
Pack them, yep.
They're canceling Christmas, I think was the headline I saw.
They're not. He's not messing around, which is kind of like it's unfortunate because we haven't quite tackled like COVID-19, so it's pretty kind of scary to even think about maybe a new strand. I know that with diseases there are multiple different strands that can come from like the whole thing, but at the same time it's like kind of like nerve-wracking because we're still it's like basically a year, like almost a year since we
like a year
because they're saying that it was like people knew about it in like December, January. So that's pretty like nerve-wracking to think that we're kind of having to maybe brace ourselves for like a new strand, and they did say that it doesn't make it. I did read that this new strand doesn't have any different effects than COVID-19 than the one we're used to. It doesn't like progress any faster, or it doesn't make you any sicker. But I'm just curious to know, like, if we don't tackle what we're dealing with now, like how bad or how catastrophic it could get if we don't.
No, like very good point. And like The UK lockdown does have like a trickle down effect. So again, like my native Barbados, I don't know how Ryan feels about his native Jamaica, but like Barbados relies heavily on tourism from the UK, and already since the lockdowns of COVID, like those little islands have been like hit pretty hardly financially. And since, like you said, like if you had your bags packed in the UK for holiday, now you have to unpack them because you're not going anywhere. That's really going to hurt like those Caribbean islands a lot too. So
I also can't help but to think like if maybe we're just getting a little too comfortable with it, like we're not,
yes,
trying to get past it or get over it. We're kind of learning how to coexist with it. So at the same time, and I know like with us, other countries, like other countries, big countries, major countries are taking it a lot seriouser, like seriouser, is that a word, a lot more serious than we are. But at the same time, it's just like people can still travel, so it's like they're still going places. So I just feel like maybe things have to really just be a lot more strict even than what we had back in March. Like things just need to completely like halt, like travel and stuff like this. And I know countries are losing out because they rely heavily on tourism, but it's like if we could just kind of calm down and like just like really take this thing seriously for a few months, I wonder how much of an impact it would actually make if people just really stayed home.
Yeah, I'm not even sure. Like, I
yeah,
know that tourism has been a bad thing, but I do know that like a lot of other countries, one of the ways that they've kind of been able to counteract that from an economic perspective is that those countries have kind of made the decision to pay or subsidize those businesses to basically stay closed,
Right.
and that's for a long time that was keeping the spread contained. I think in recent months, they've been a little bit more lax, and that's why we kind of seen the numbers jump up again. But I think that's where we have to ultimately get to, wherein we're paying businesses to stay closed and pay their employees so that we can kind of continue to move on until we have this contained, until we have 60. I think the numbers are like 70% of the population needs to be vaccinated in order for us to kind of get back to some semblance of normal. I
yep,
think that needs to be the target. Like that's where we need to start working. And I think until we can say, hey, you can go out and not get sick or catch this thing and spread it to other people around you. We need to be in a place where businesses, because that's honestly what's driving a lot of the decisions, a lot of what's happening right now, right? It's businesses are so afraid of losing out on customers and not being able to pay their rents and things like that.
yep.
Much more so than like regular citizens, unfortunately. But I think if we are propping them up for the time being, then I think that'll ease some of the pressure to kind of return back to normal and kind of ignore any sort of restrictions that are keeping people from uh, that are limiting our lives and keeping us from being able to enjoy or enjoy some semblance of normalcy.
Which
But
is
that's proving to be a challenge.
Yeah, which is the unfortunate part because until people feel comfortable with their finances, staying in like, because people are going back to work or they're going places because they are like, there's not much relief. So people feel
Yeah.
like they have to work, and I think unless there's like some sort of incentive or some sort of like economic relief that allows people to stay home for these months that we need to see like a decrease in numbers, then people are still going to, and because things are open, it's not just people. Yes, there are some people that are like out because they have to work and da 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 da, but then there's also some people who are like traveling. But I think until you pay people to stay home, you're gonna run into the same problem. And
Yep.
Yep. And Marcus, I think you brought up a good point. Like, kind of how these other countries did, like, take on the payroll for these businesses to make sure that no one gets laid off, and also provide additional incentive for them to remain closed and for people to remain home. It kind of highlights, and we're going to talk about this like in our next segment, but it kind of highlights how much our government, like Congress and executive branch, like kind of abdicated their responsibility to help out the American people.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of like left with this cat and mouse where it's like businesses want to stay open because there's really not much help coming in to keep them open. So they want customers to come in, but that's going to increase our numbers. So it just highlights just how like Congress and like the executive branch has completely abdicated their responsibilities here. for the American people.
Yeah, fully agreed. It's funny. I remember during the Obama era, there was always this kind of cry from like, very serious people who would say, "Oh, there's no leadership. There's this lack of leadership in Washington, and that's why nothing gets done." And so it's funny to kind of see this last year there's been this complete and total lack of leadership from Trump and his cronies in the party and the Republican Party on down that have kind of led us to this point where there's this fight to like, oh, businesses have to stay open versus you know people are still getting sick and we're not doing anything to kind of counter that as best as we can. So I don't know.
I think it's kind of hypocritical the way the United States system is set up. It's because like we place such an emphasis on like being number one, but when it came time for the government to step in, like it showed that we were basically a developing country because we couldn't support anybody, we couldn't offer any help to anybody. We saw eviction rates going up and stuff, and like in some places you kind of like feel for people who are asking for the country to be reopened because they're not getting any help from anybody. So businesses are getting closed because the government is lacking the one thing that government requires you to do, and that's compromise, and that's reach a mid road between the two. And they have proven that both sides have proven that they can't compromise on everything. And the fact that one person in Mitch McConnell is holding the whole country hostage is really crazy. Like Mitch McConnell has literally been the most powerful man in the country for like the last 5-6 years, stretching back to the Obama administration. And there is no check or balance on him. He's just doing what he wants. Like he has like a millions of bills on his desk that is not going to get addressed because he doesn't want to look at it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's why I always say like there's no such thing as a good Republican because, those Republicans in the Senate, they elect him and they can always work around him. And like to see that he's just so hesitant to offer additional aid to the American people, there's a deafening silence from other Republicans in the Senate.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I see that crazy Jim Jordan going to tweet the other day that the best like stimulus is a job. I'm like, how are people supposed to get that's so tone deaf. Like, how are people supposed to get a job if the economy shut down and if no one's not hiring? Like, it's so counterintuitive.
That's
like what they're doing.
Right.
Like they're completely out of touch. For them, and this is, and I understand that like the Democrats have tried to like push for more relief, and the Republicans, as normal, usually just give them some pushback. But you have to understand, like these senators, these elected officials have the money to stay home if they choose to. They can't afford to support themselves through this. Meanwhile, the average person has to work. They have to put themselves at risk of catching this virus because they have to feed their family. Like I can't not afford. There's a lot of people who are like, I can't afford to just stay home. A lot of people took a very hard hit when during like March to June when we were in the house because unemployment was like for a lot of states unemployment was like a clusterfuck, excuse my language, but it was just all over the place. You couldn't get any update on your claim, and if you did, you didn't know like when you were gonna get your money, and then the ridiculous $1,200 that's supposed to last 9 months. It's almost very insulting that their response or their suggestion is like, okay, well, get a job. But then you say getting a job is only furthering the problem because you're putting yourself and others at risk of catching this virus. So it just goes to show how out of touch these people are. And even though they mean well, you have to understand like sometimes people talk from a place of privilege. And a lot of them are in a very privileged position to say like, oh, just get a job or work or anything, because it's like you have the money. If you wanted to stay home, like again, they took multiple recesses on the relief topic. There were so many breaks and relief, like, oh, we're gonna go, like even Labor Day, we're gonna take a break for Labor Day and Thanksgiving and stuff because they can afford to. So I think it's insulting to suggest that these people are just complaining, especially because COVID has affected everyone. It has affected everyone, but I can't imagine how much it affects the average person who was already barely making a living to begin with and already struggling to make ends meet. And now you add this that has been just an economic disaster a public health disaster too, you add that into the fold and it only further like just pushes people. I always say a lot of working class people are like one crisis, one layoff, one
Yep.
injury, one whatever from poverty. And this pandemic, this pandemic has proven that, like, we were all maybe just okay getting by, and then COVID came by and it just has completely devastated a lot of people. So I think, it's just the whole privilege, the speaking from out of touch, just being completely like removed from reality.
No, yeah, couldn't say it any better, Carly. All right, but again, we're gonna like talk about this more in depth in our next segment. But moving on through headlines, I'm very, very excited about this one headline here. This is Space Force. I was one of the few people that was super excited about the creation of the Space Force. It just sounds cool. I've been hoping, and I go on their website all the time. Like the Space Force has like a military website just to see like if there's any updates on like their insignia and everything like that. So there has been like a latest update for the Space Force. So you know how like in the Army you're called a soldier, the Marines are called a Marine, Navy you're called like a sailor, Air Force you're called an airman. Well, the Space Force, you're going to be called a Guardian, aka the Guardians of the Galaxy. If you haven't watched that movie, please go watch it. But I am just super excited about that. I think the name is great.
That has to be copyright infringement.
Who cares? The government just told him to shut up. Like, I like
Eminent domain. Eminent domain on the name.
Eminent domain on that. But I do like the new name for it. Vice President Pence came out and announced it. So one of the very, very few things that I like from this administration. It's not a whole lot. So moving on here. So it's been reported. I don't think there's any surprise here, but Black Americans tend to donate a higher share of their wealth than white Americans. I don't really see, like, I'm not really surprised by this headline. This is from the Washington Post. Whatsoever. I mean, even like in our church culture, like we just donate a lot of money to the church. So I'm really not surprised by this at all.
Yeah, I'm looking at the article now, and it's 2/3 of Black households donate to community-based organizations and causes to the tune of $11 billion a year. And I know that there are a lot of people that like to point at the Black community and say, "Oh, you guys don't invest in your own community. You guys don't invest in your people." And I think that when you see numbers like that, it's like, oh, on the contrary, like people are still out there. People we are. Whether the money's actually getting to those communities or getting to the causes that matter to us, is another question. But clearly the money is there. Clearly the intentions are there. The thoughts are there. I think now it's just a matter of I think honestly, $11 billion, what that is, it's kind of like a drop in the bucket compared to all the wealth that is out there. But no, it is interesting to see that that there's clearly a desire on the part of many Black households to kind of to improve things. It's just the actual seeing it come into fruition looks like the next piece of the puzzle that we need to figure out. But yeah, this is kind of encouraging, I would say.
So I think you kind of brought up a good point, and I think this kind of further shows that these racial stereotypes about Black Americans that probably came from like the 80s, maybe the 70s, they're just simply not true. And headlines or certain studies or stats like this kind of like emphasizes that we do care about our own community, we do invest a lot in ourselves. Like this definitely does show that. So that old stereotype that keeps getting regurgitated over and over again just is not true. We just got to stop playing into that.
Yeah.
But I think also a lot of people tend to like say things without doing like their due diligence, which is like a tale as old as time, especially when it comes to the Black community. Everyone likes to say what we do and what we don't do without actually knowing what we do or what we don't do. So it's not as super surprising to me as it may seem to others, because people have like a lot of misconceptions when it comes to what Black people do, especially what Black people do with their money. So it's interesting that this report came out because I feel like anybody who would actually be interested in, not spewing ignorance, and because, one thing I like to say, if I'm incorrect about something or I have a preconceived notion about something, it's always interesting for me to read up on it so that I don't sound ignorant. A lot of people have no problem sounding ignorant and just making false claims. So again, this is another thing that I didn't know this, but I'm not super surprised, because I do feel like Black people tend to, despite us having despite there being a wealth gap, I do feel like we tend to invest in our own community and give back when we can with what little that we do have compared to what is out there in other communities as far as wealth.
Speaking to that wealth gaps real quick, I just want to say that the median wealth gap for median wealth for white families is $188,200 versus the Black families' median wealth is 24,000, according to a survey from 2019.
Wow.
So I kind of spoke
That's
to that.
nuts.
It's a nuts number, and I think if you consider that we're still managing to give like 2/3 of our families are still managing to give up $11 billion, like that's a lot, but I think it's even more eye popping considering the size of this wealth gap. Like that's that's an incredible number, I think.
And I think also a lot of people don't even, they still feel like that wealth gap is outdated, and it's very much still a real thing. Like we make, and like the wealth compared to what we make on an average compared to what they make or what white people make on an average is astronomically different. And a lot of people think that we're just saying this to because we like to complain, quote unquote, but it's true. Like we are severely lacking when it comes to wealth, even though we've made strides as far as education and ownership and different business ventures that Black people tend to get into. It's still lacking. It's not a made up number. It's not a made up concept. It's very real.
I'm still shocked by that stat, Marcus.
Yeah.
No, it's a crazy
Yes.
it's a crazy number. I
It's
thought I looked at it. I was like, is there a comma missing or something? But no, that's
Yeah, right. That's
or misplaced.
an insane stat line. I'm like, that's definitely
You
intentional.
have to understand, like a lot of
When was the stat taken?
This was from a Federal Reserve survey from 2019.
I thought it was doing good, folks.
That's wow.
I also think because it's like there's something called generational wealth. A lot of white
Yes.
people have money because of generational wealth, whereas Black people we tend to and this is not this is like the truth, we tend to pass down debt and poverty. We don't have generational wealth like they do. We usually have we don't have the leg up, the head start that a lot of them do. Not to say that there aren't white people that go out and make a living for themselves and create wealth for themselves. I'm just saying, like, there's definitely a head start that they have that we do not have. A lot of us are first generations. A lot of us are coming into wealth for the first time, and that our grandparents, our parents didn't have the opportunity to have. So it's like we're just now making strides when it comes to wealth. And also we look at prolific figures in the Black community and think because of select few are doing well, that we're all doing well. And that's not how you gauge wealth at all.
No, I think there was a book a few years ago called Capital by Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Sayes, I want to say. And I think when they attributed, the wealth to exactly what you're talking about, Carly. It's inherited wealth. It's passed down. And because we don't tax when wealth passes from a father to their child or whatever, you don't tax it at a high rate over once it gets to a certain level of income. That's why you're seeing wealth kind of stay within these certain families, within these certain groups of people, rather than being spread out more. Once there's a more progressive tax system kind of in place, and if that's something if people were really interested in addressing this gap, which again is still astounding. I still have it blown up on my screen here. But if they were serious about kind of addressing Black wealth, rather than doing the platinum plan from Trump and Ice Cube, they would actually do something to kind of tackle the way the wealth is inherited, and making sure that money is distributed back into the economy and back into so that other people can kind of touch that wealth, those resources.
Yeah, and I also want to say this, a lot of people think financial literacy is the problem, and it is not. Teaching people how to manage their money is not going to make them money. We need money. That's what it is. We don't have the money. It's not that we are ignorant when it comes to money. It's not that we don't know how to manage money. We don't have it. And I think a lot of these programs that are rooted in giving Black people money or giving them wealth is rooted in teaching them how to manage their finances. And we don't have any finances to manage. So I think it's also giving the right like programs, giving the right incentives, and really giving to contribute to Black wealth, and not just saying like, hey, here, if you were to get $1,000, this is how you make it stretch. That's not doing anything for anybody.
No, it's treating the wrong symptom. It's like if somebody has a cold and you give them an ice pack for their knee, like it's not going to get the job done.
Yeah, you're tackling the wrong problem.
Yeah. And Carl also brought up a good point. There's like some serious historical context to this. Like, for example, when slaves were freed, they were promised like 40 acres and a meal. That never happened. When the United States expanded westward and the Homestead Act was in place, that mostly benefited white Americans. World War II, the GI Bill was explicitly excluded from Black veterans when they returned home.
The homeowner program that I believe it was under FDR, but this homeowner program where, you know, they were giving soldiers money to buy homes and you know, whatever. And these neighborhoods, first of all, these neighborhoods weren't welcoming Black people. They weren't giving
redlining policies.
Exactly. And that still affects people to this day. Like, it's not just, it's so many different things. Again, I like to say this, a lot of people, you know, it's racism. It's really just what it is. It's not like, this is not a word we like to use around to play victim. It really is rooted in racism, in that we just don't have the access to the same programs, the same incentives, the same relief, the same, you know, anything that white people get, or the white community gets historically and today.
Yep.
This is the reason why we need to get rid of Wells Fargo's. This has been my campaign against Wells Fargo's for years. Like, Wells Fargo's, I think their role in the 2008 crisis, when they owned most of Americans' homes, and the predatory way that they targeted Black communities and minority communities, selling them subprime mortgage loans and giving them and piling on debt that they know that probably they could not afford. I think that's very predatory. And I think the worst part about the American system is that we have these banks that are too big to fail. Like, no way should Wells Fargo survive what they did, you know, to further continue discriminating. Because every year there's a new scandal that comes out of Wells Fargo's that they did something discriminatory to our community, you know. So I don't understand why they still exist as a financial institution after everything.
They were still one of the good ones too. Like, they were the ones that we were like, oh, Wells Fargo is healthy. Let's give them Wachovia, and let's not, not going to punish John Stump for any of those guys. And then I think the program of targeting minorities came out. There was also something where they were like adding I think they were adding like fees to people's accounts or something, and taking money that they didn't deserve.
And wasn't the CEO came out and said like he couldn't find like any good like Black people to hire?
That happened just this year, didn't it?
Yeah,
this year. Well, those two things were this year. The one was earlier. The one that Marcus mentioned was earlier, and this one just happened like a couple weeks ago, when he said that there's no he couldn't find good Black people to hire.
Yeah, it's also like we're also exploited too. For the most part, like a lot of times, we go out and we have to like settle, because it's like when you don't come from money, you're trying to survive. You know, we have like a survival mindset. You usually take like these low wage jobs. We're exploited, you know, like the people higher up are not interested in giving us, you know, they're not interested in being at an even playing field with us. It's like, we want you to stay where you are so that we can stay where we are. So it's really not, it's also that. And then when you think about that, it's like nobody's really interested in giving to us so that we can be equals. So when you think about it, where are we supposed to get this wealth from if nobody is interested in giving us what we're owed?
Yeah, really good points. So let's move on to our next topic, though. So this is one that Marcus brought onto our OneNote here, and it's very interesting. And that is according to The Atlantic, race is becoming less important than place, education, and electoral politics. And I thought like that was really fascinating. So for example, non-white voters were moving to the right. We kind of saw this in New York City, especially in the Bronx, how Trump kind of increased like his voting turnout in the Bronx, which is kind of surprising. Blacks and Latinos men are responsible for this shift. As we all know that college educated voters are now moving more towards the left, non-educated moving more towards the right.
Yeah.
So it is kind of fascinating to see that, like, I don't know. It's just fascinating to see that race is now becoming like less important in politics. I guess it's a kind of a good and bad thing to
I was
say
just
at
gonna
least.
say
It
that.
is good. Like we
Yeah.
shouldn't be. I think I mean we live in a world where like racism, where race, you can kind of use like these race-based appeals that I think Republicans have done a really good job on, and have for whatever
Yeah.
reason kind of backfired for Democrats. I think when you can kind of take that out of the equation, that means that I think you're going to have parties that are going to be able to kind of cater to different people in a better way. Like if you're a Republican now, you might want to be more open to doing things that are going to help Black and Latino people or young people if they were able to come around. I think you want to be able to kind of move entire groups out of one party and say, hey, we kind of cater to everyone, if it's possible. So that's the good news. But I think on the bad news, it's just you kind of have to like shift the strategy and shift your understanding of how if as a Democrat, like how do we get these people back into the fold? What can we offer them?
Yeah.
Like if you're a Democrat and you can't reach, I think now the question is, how do you reach working class or college, non-college educated, voters, not just white voters? Like,
Mhm.
what's that pitch going to look like? What are you going to be able to? What can you put together that's going to appeal to them? That's not going to kind of alienate the rest of your party. So it's kind of like it's always shifting now, and it's like, how are you going to respond to that? Are you going to kind of tack to the center, which is what we're seeing right now, where they're trying to blame, defund the police and socialism and Medicare for all for their issues, or like what's going to be the kind of response to this? And that's going to be the next. That's going to be interesting to see how that develops over the next year or two.
So I'll play like devil's advocate a little bit for this, right? I can't speak on Latino men, but at least for Black men, again, I'm only playing devil's advocate. If you're coming into my neighborhood and saying that I have to vote for you, I have to vote for you, and yet I'm not seeing much change in my neighborhood or my issues being prioritized, we only live in a two-party system, which is why I'm a big advocate for third parties.
Mm-hmm.
There is another party,
Right.
and like in order for you to show like your protests against like the lack of attention being shown to you, you vote for the other side. And again, like this kind of was shown
I,
front and center with like President like Biden when he's called the civil rights leaders, right? They asked him for two things. That's it. Prioritize criminal justice, police reform. Biden said no to that. Just straight up. And hey, pick Marshall Fudge to be agriculture secretary. Biden said no to that. So if you're telling them point blank no to these two things that like Black Americans asked for, again, like I don't know, playing devil's advocate, what else do you want me to do?
I
yeah,
think
I think that's an interesting point because a lot of times you have to think about people who for voting this is not their first go round. So it's like you have to understand like maybe if someone's been voting Democrat for like the last I don't know 4 or 5 elections and they're like okay like my answers or I mean my questions are still not my concerns are not being addressed. It doesn't really seem like my vote is making any type of difference because my circumstances my things have not changed. It's not really taboo or kind of far-fetched to assume that maybe they might vote the other side just to see if things will be different. So I think it is a good thing because like Marcus said, it forces them to kind of like change the strategy and it kind of forces you to get a little bit more, I would say, personal with how you're approaching like different people. But I'm not really I can't really be upset because I know like a lot of people that was their thing with Trump. Like we voted for Trump because he wasn't a politician and I keep voting Democrat and it seems like my circumstances and I think that can be especially true for like marginalized people
Right.
because you tend to kind of feel like you're concerned like the things that affect your community you're like you personally go under address or kind of
do
go ignored.
I have a question. So do y'all think that the recent attacks, like semi asking to hold accountable for their actions of black and critique of black men is forcing them to the other side, to vote for the other side because the DNC has offered nothing to like black men, like like in recent years. Like it's very hard to ask somebody what was Joe Biden's policy? What was his premier policy that he ran on?
Cap,
There was no there's been no like substantial policy. We're
cap.
just going to vote for this guy,
I'm
you
calling
know?
cap on that. They had to put out a whole one pager, Ryan, for black men. What are you talking about? Come on. No, I do think that they actually, Carl, you can go. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think to kind of go off of what Ryan's saying, it's a lot of talking too, but not like talk like you're talking at me. Like if
Yes.
you vote for me, I got you. But then, and especially as a Black woman who I feel like we're constantly being used to get people where they need to go. But when you get there, it's kind of like, well, thanks, but we're going to move on from you. So I get that in the sense that like a lot of people may feel like I'm being used as a tool to get people to where they are, but that's it. Like you don't really care about me. And with this whole, the whole platinum plan or whatever the case may be, it's like it's the same old, like we're telling you what we want you to know. We want you to hear this. We want you to feel this so that you believe me. But then when we put you where you're supposed to be or where you want to go, it's like, now I'm expecting you to act on what you said you were going to do, and you don't.
That's an interesting idea. I never thought of it as in terms of talking at you versus talking with you, but that's a good kind of way to understand like the way that's politicians on both sides are really kind of trying to get these communities to vote for them.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of this kind of this shift of Black men, and it may even extend to Hispanic men. I think there's also a lift in Asian American men as well, kind of going or shift going to Trump. But I do think it's very simple. I think that's over the last 4 years, if you are making more money than you were beforehand, I think you're going to attribute that to what Trump was doing prior to COVID. And it's like, why would I want to vote for someone else who I don't know I haven't taken the time to kind of figure out what they're doing. I don't know if they're kind of continue what his policies are, but I know that now I have more money in my pocket than I did before. So I'm just going to ride with this guy. And it could be as simple as that rather than some sort of appeal and, oh, he said they're socialists. It's like, I have more money now. So I'm going to go for the guy who's going to continue to put money in my pocket and make sure that I have a job that's better than what I have.
And that was a lot of people's like feelings. A lot of people were like, I'm coming into more money than I ever had. And they kind of attributed it to that, to like Trump and his policies.
Yeah, keep it rolling.
And so for them, it's like, I've never achieved this much when Obama was here or in previous, presidencies. So they are like, okay, well, there's clearly something that this man is doing, this presidency, this administration is doing that is contributing to me and my financial situation or just my overall situation in general. And so we're going to keep it going. And yep. I think for a lot of people who don't come from wealth, that can be a very, I would say like a very fine line, because that may be the case. It may be the case, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, if you get what I'm saying. So I think it's important to kind of also acknowledge like who these people are and the circumstances in which they're coming from and the circumstances in which they find themselves now, especially over the last 4 years, and how or if Joe Biden's administration and his policies will further that. Because I think also this country in particular, it's very interpersonal, like everyone's out for self. So for them, it's not like, oh, I'm looking at it on a community level. I'm looking at it on a personal level. Like I have more money than I did before. It doesn't matter if, my comadres have money or not. It's just me. I'm richer than I was before. This man made me rich. Are you going to keep me rich? And so, I think that's also, it has a lot to do with the people in which you're talking about, whether you're talking about Black men, Hispanic men, women, whoever.
So I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me with this one or not, but me personally, when I saw the Trump presidency, he drove so hard for the fringe right party, right? So basically, it didn't matter about the polling data for Obamacare. He made it like his main goal to like remove Obamacare. Made it his main goal to put up like a border wall, even though that wasn't too popular, right? Like he just did not care about like polls whatsoever. He only cared about like the fringe right wing of his party and like what they cared about, right? And so like me as a Democrat now, it's like, kind of like what Marcus said, it's like we just won the election. We maintained the House, we lost a couple of seats, but yet all we're hearing is like, well, defund the police is too toxic. Sure, maybe it was, right? Or the Green New Deal is too toxic. Sure, maybe we need a new term for that, right? But we just keep like the fringe left wing of the party or the left wing of the Democratic Party is always like cast aside. Like we're never really going to advocate for you. But like when you look at the right, it's like, yo, we got you guys. Don't worry, we got you guys. And like I think like that alone is kind of like if I'm like an undecided black voter, I'm like, well, that side kind of rides for me. You know what I mean? I'm gonna go for that side. So I don't know if you guys like notice that or not, or maybe that's just my personal viewpoints. But I don't know.
Now
I always
I
saw
agree
that.
with you. I agree with you. I feel like the blue collar Democrats, that's what they call themselves, are like firmly in control of the party. They don't try to give the other side they are not a platform or anything. Just like I was saying, making the comparison between the far left side of our party and the Freedom Caucus. Republicans ignored the Freedom Caucus, but eventually the Freedom Caucus just overtook the party and became the platform of the party. Like they became what Trump is today. So if we're not like careful, we might end up in a situation like that. You know, where the party gets taken over because the party is supposed to be the umbrella for everybody to come under. You know, but they get pushed aside all the time.
Look, I'm low key advocating for AOC to take over. So
if we had 30 more, 40 more AOCs in office, we'd be in a much better place.
yeah, it'll be a much
Truth be
better
told.
place. All right, guys, we spent way too long on this topic. It was a great discussion. Let me just say this thing because we have to, but Russia hacked us. They hacked us big time. Everyone who's in power agrees that Russia hacked us, except for our current sitting president. He thinks it was China. Where's his evidence? We don't have any evidence. We just have to go by his word. But Russia did declare a serious hack on us. Senator Dick Durbin has called it basically a declaration of war by Russia. Ooh, sorry about that. So we'll just see how that progresses.
I think Romney came out today too. He also said that Trump has a blind spot on Russia and on this hack. So I think one, we can expect Trump to lash out against him sometime in the next couple of days.
Right.
But yeah, I hope we don't have a war with Russia. I don't think we need to do a whole war thing.
We're not. We're not. I think we are entering Cold War II, but it's not just with Russia. I think it's Russia and China that we're entering Cold War II.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like what we're entering into. I think the only problem is that with the original Cold War, it was more so like it was capitalism versus like communism or socialism, right? It's like if this other side succeeds, I lose all my money because like the workers take over my business, right? But now it's like if you're a capitalist, if you're a business, you succeed no matter what, which is why we're not like emphasizing we're in a Cold War. But I think we're in a Cold War for Russia and China right now. We're just not saying it out loud.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right.
Yeah, that's really true.
Thank you, guys. All right, let's talk about President-elect Joseph Biden Jr.'s transition team here. So Joe Biden picked former Obama EPA chief Gina McCarthy to be the first White House climate czar. Now, just for clarification, she's only going to look at the domestic side. John Kerry is going to primarily focus his attention on the international side.
Dope.
So it's good to see that at least Joe Biden is focusing on the climate. It's good to see Kevin's plans there. All right. Congresswoman Deb Haaland is going to be named the next Interior Secretary. If approved, she's going to be the first Native American to hold that position. So round of applause for that.
It sounds crazy, by the way. That she's going to be the first Native American to hold that position. Is she the first Native American cabinet person?
So the article that I was reading emphasized to hold this position.
Yeah, that's
she's
crazy.
The first Native American secretary in the U.S. history.
That's what I was saying last week. It's super crazy that we are hearing the first. It is especially super crazy that we are hearing the first Native American, but also I'm not surprised because we have basically historically just disregarded Native Americans, even though
we've erased them.
I think for it to be a Native American is especially like shocking because I feel like this is their stuff. So it's just crazy how we're like constantly just disregarding them in their own country, basically.
So I have always said like the only other group of people in the U.S. that can like experience what Black people did, or maybe more, is Native Americans.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. From the beginning of time.
Yes, from the beginning of time.
I would argue more only because this is like their land. I think
Yes.
you know, anytime people are like, oh, just go back to where you come from, it's especially hysterical when they say it to Native Americans, because it's like they are where they belong. The rest of us were like, you know, we come from other places. So I think I'm very disappointed, but at the same time, I'm very optimistic in the sense that maybe we will start to pay it forward, in the sense that we completely disregard the people who have built this country, and maybe we will start to pay it forward or give them back just a fraction of what we've taken from them. And when I say we, I'm talking about white people.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like Native Americans are still fighting for their lands to this day, right? So if
Yes.
a Native American reserve has oil on it, you can kiss their land rights goodbye. You know, like the Supreme Court, despite it shifting from liberal to conservative, doesn't matter. They've always kind of ruled in favor of corporate interests.
Right.
The federal government hasn't really been backing them that much. So I'm very hopeful that with this new appointment that we can at least see some like restoration of like Native American rights, as Carly said.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in terms of AG, we're still waiting to see who Joe Biden is going to pick. He hasn't announced anyone yet. There is going to be a potential conflict of interest with the department because the Justice Department is currently investigating Hunter Biden. So we're going to see. I still think Marcus's prediction is correct. I still think it's going to be Doug Jones, but we will see.
Right.
Yeah, I think Doug Jones still kind of ticks the boxes of being a friend, and also I think he has the civil rights bona fides to get the job done. But who knows at this point?
Yeah, again, who knows at this point? I know Joe Biden has a tendency to nominate people that he knows, likes, and trusts. So,
which I would argue.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
go ahead first. No, go ahead first.
Which I would argue again, if they have the experience. I know we talked about this like a few pods ago, but you know, we're seeing like maybe he's also calling on people that he served with during his time in the Obama administration. If I feel like that's okay if they have the experience and they have they're able to handle their role, because as we've seen in the Trump administration, he was kind of just hiring people out of like nepotism or just stupidity or whatever the case may be. So if the person is qualified, then I'm okay with that. But it's like, because you know, we have to get back to putting people in places where they can do their job and do their job well.
So the party, there's rumors going around that Joe Biden is also considering Merrick Garland for the position. What do you guys think of that?
I don't really know Merrick Garland that well. I do know that when he was nominated to be the Supreme Court justice, he was basically the most conservative Supreme Court justice you can expect from a Democratic president.
Yep.
But other than that, I don't really know his policies. I don't know his viewpoints or anything like that. So I don't know. I only know Doug Jones. I'm personally advocating for Eric Holder to do this again because he's Bajan and I'm biased. But I don't really know about Merrick Garland. I don't really know.
Merrick Garland he's got like a sense, like as a Democrat, as a left-leaning Democrat, you're gonna look at him as a Republican. As a Republican, you're gonna look at him as a centrist, but he's literally just a centrist blue-collar Democrat. Like in most of his ruling, I mean, Republicans loved him before the Obama confirmation. That's probably why they picked him up, because he did the Unabomber investigation and the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma and stuff like that. He was the AG in charge of all of that. So like they actually love him down there, like down in the South. So that's what they normally bank on. The only issue that the Democrats run into is that if Merrick Garland leaves, he's the chief judge of the DC Circuit Court right now. So they could, and if we don't win back the Senate, that's going to cause an issue because they'd have to get through Mitch McConnell to confirm a justice to take his place. And that's what I think that's their biggest fear in not picking him yet.
Yeah, I think to take him from that and then have to go through the whole replacing him process is like, especially if the Georgia runoff doesn't go the way that we want it to go. That's actually like an accurate concern, because then you would have to replace him. And so I think like they should probably just leave him where he is and focus on Doug Jones.
Oh, what's interesting about Merrick Garland is that I think the idea to actually even nominate him in the first place is that it came from a Utah Senator, Orrin Hatch, who threw his name out there, and Obama was like, you know what, fine, we'll go with that. But it's probably also not a good thing that, for most people, when you hear Merrick Garland's name, you just think of him as the guy who got denied a seat on the Supreme Court, and not so much, what is his actual resume, which, as Ryan was getting into, is actually impressive.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel as good about his nomination as I would as someone like Doug Jones. But I mean, I'm open to anyone. I think anyone's better than Bob Barr, who we just got through. As long as we have someone who can kind of restore dignity to the office and respect to the office, I'm all for it. Whoever gets nominated,
right?
Which is a very low bar, I understand.
Yeah.
It's an extremely low bar for AJ.
So it's sad. It's a very low bar.
And this is like a pretty powerful position. We're just like, whoever Joe picks, we're good.
I think another thing too with this is because we talked about there's kind of pressure on Biden to kind of have a very diverse cabinet, and one of the things that's come up, I'm probably going to steal your segue, Kev, but Biden there is some pressure to hire a black agent to give the AG seat to someone who's black. But what he might do is give that Secretary of Commerce seats to a black person to give him cover, to give a Merrick Garland or a Doug Jones or someone like that the position. But I think Melody Hobson is someone who's up for the job. But I think what we're hearing lately is that Meg Whitman, a former Republican, is actually in the driver's seat to get the Secretary of Commerce seat. So what do you guys think about handing over a Democratic cabinet seat to a Republican?
So let me just add some more clarification to that. There is actually like a long-standing tradition of presidents nominating someone from the opposite party to fill in the cabinet role. So George Bush did that. His defense secretary, Robert Gates, he was a Bush holdover. And President Bush himself, he had, I think, a Democratic person in his cabinet as well. So there is tradition and precedent to this, and Joe Biden did run on bringing us back to quote unquote normal. But to answer your question, we're not in a new normal, and I don't think he should do this. But I don't know. He did kind of campaign on this. He did have Republicans during the DNC convention. He had
who did nothing for him, by the way.
Shouts
to John Kasich, who did nothing for him in Ohio.
He had more speaking time than AOC, just saying. And but like he did really campaign on like trying to reach out to like the moderate Republican base.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, for me, it's like no one voted for you to kind of have a Republican voice in your cabinet. You know what I mean? Like the people that supported you, the people that
were kind of turned off by Republicans.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think I think, like you said, there is a history of it, but I also feel like we're in unprecedented times. We just went through I would say probably one of like the most devastating 4 years that like I've had to live through, especially like being someone that could vote and was aware and had like these policies that genuinely affected me. I think it's different when you're underage and these policies don't affect you personally. They kind of like are something that you hear about. But I think as an adult, like these last 4 years have been so traumatizing as far as like politics that we're kind of like turned off by Republicans. So I would only say no, only because that's like Marcus said, that's not what we hired. That's not what we elected you for. And if that was the case, we would have, if we wanted a Republican, we would have voted Republican. So I would say no. And I think we should just, especially because we are we're so worried about the Georgia runoff and what's going on in the Senate that I think we want to fill as many roles as we can, Democrat, because it makes it just like more unified in getting what we want done.
Give it to Melody Hobson. She just raised a ton of money for Democratic causes. She's the chairman of the board at Starbucks. She's
Oh,
here, man, and she's a black woman. Like,
yeah.
just give her the job. All right, she'll
Say
be.
less. Yeah, no, I mean, like, was there like a serious swing in like moderate Republicans that voted for Joe Biden? Like, is there like
Nah,
hard data to show like, hey, he should probably give them like a cabinet position? If there's not, then like, why even bother with like the negative headlines? You know, like, I, I just don't get it.
You already have a fractured party, and I don't think reaching across the aisle to a party that's doesn't want to play ball with you anyway.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. There's no upside to this. You're
Exactly.
just gonna piss everybody off. So you may as well just cater to your base, cater to the people that voted for you, and put in someone who's at least of your party.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Like, I know Joe Biden, like he comes from that old school era of politics, but I just don't see the point of it now. I just think like you're just gonna get yourself into like negative attack ads or whatever, or negative headlines. And it's just like, why even bother doing that to yourself?
Yeah, I think it's just a failure. I think on older generation, I guess, to kind of see how polarized we are in terms of the left and the right and the schism. Like there's a chasm between us in terms of the things that we believe in and our values. And it's just for whatever reason, I think once you reach a certain age, you don't see it anymore. You're just kind of blind to it. But I think everyone else who's like of a certain age can kind of see that it's there
So
and how damaging it is.
I would give Joe Biden a pass if he wasn't vice president with President Obama. But he was vice president with Obama, and like the Republicans for 6 years of his 8-year term
mm-hmm.
did not cooperate, did not do anything to help out. President Obama bent over backwards to work with John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House. Nothing really helped enough of that. Like there was no major deals that arose from that. There was no like huge bipartisanness that came out of it. Like it died during the Obama era. You can argue that it was dying during the Clinton era. So
Yeah.
it's just like, why are you like hearkening back to like this 80s, 70s, 60s style of politics? It doesn't quite make any sense.
Yeah,
But
it doesn't make sense. You're right.
I don't know. That's just my rant. I apologize. Let's talk about Congress to cool us down a little bit. All right. So here's the main question with the Congress topic. Can we really coexist? So again, we're a two-party system. Can our two parties really coexist? Rush Limbaugh recently said that liberals and conservatives cannot. General Flynn, a felon and former NSA chief, which is a nasty, nasty thing to say in one sentence. Basically, he was calling for the military to rerun the election. That is a very scary thought. There was a push in Congress from Republicans to at least like overturn the election, basically not certifying the election.
Mm-hmm.
Mitch McConnell has urged Republicans in Congress to not do this, which is rather shocking. And a New Jersey congressman, has even wanted to invoke a Civil War amendment, the 14th Amendment, in order to block 126 Republicans from seating in the House for opposing the electoral results. So let me just ask you guys this question again. Can we really coexist in this new era of politics?
But my thing is like, why do we always strive to coexist with them when they don't strive to coexist
Just
with
this with
us?
us, right?
Like
Yeah,
we
that's a good
are
point.
so like we're so I guess willing to work with them and be the bigger person, or well, the bigger party. And I understand that, like, there's this desire to be unified and not to be like enemies, and because at the end of the day the country suffers when the two don't get along. But at the end of the day they don't see it that way. They really could care less what gets done as long as their needs and their like what they want is satisfied. So I feel like, when are we going to realize that they don't approach it the same way and stop trying? Because it really doesn't work. They don't care. Like look at all this pushback that we've gotten from the whole COVID relief thing. Like we spent the last months trying to work with them, and in the end, like they didn't care about what we were proposing. It was like, well, we don't want to do that, so no. And then we would come back, and then it would be like, no. So it's like, let's move on from it. It's not working. Like, so, stop seeing them as like maybe, partners or like, we're in this together. We have a goal and that we're trying to accomplish together, because they don't see it that way. They don't see it like we have the same goal. They have their goals that they try to accomplish. They see what we have there. They see our agendas as something that we're trying to accomplish, and they don't try to intertwine them. They're not interested in meeting us halfway. They're not interested in compromise. And so I think we just always get like screwed in the end, because we're trying to be so, so kind, so diplomatic, so and so it's like we have to it's kind of like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And literally Democrats are insane at this point, because we keep trying and it's not working. So we just have to give up.
No, 100% agreed. And you actually kind of segued into a good point, bringing up the stimulus package or the stimulus bill that's going through Congress right now. So if you've been paying attention to the news right now, they've been debating about giving us another check or not, right? We're not going to get another $1,200 check.
Can I break news on that?
Oh, I was just about to say breaking news.
They just agreed. They just agreed on a stimulus deal that's going to give $600 checks to everyone.
They just now?
Yeah, just agreed. So yeah.
Oh man.
We are
now that podcast. This is our first breaking news.
$900 billion bill. Not as much as it was.
What they have been talking about for the last week, but they finally finalized it, and I just if that doesn't show you
$600,
if that doesn't show you that they're not interested in working with us, then I don't know what does, because this is something that we have tried to get more and more and more and more out of them, and they have just refused. And finally, again, we have gotten the short end of the stick, and we've had to settle to appease them.
Not just that, there was a bill from back in May, and I think I've said it before on the podcast, but there's a HEROES Act put out in May from the House. We were ready to do a bill. The Democratic side was ready to do a bill and get something done. And Republicans just kind of set on it. We're not going to do anything. Oh, we don't want to do that. And then they started making all that noise about, we don't want to give people money again because they're making more money for not working with unemployment than they were beforehand. They kind of made that a big issue when it really wasn't, because it was the alternative is that they go back to work. One, they're terribly underpaid if that's the case. But two, if they go back to work, they're going to get sick, and it's the issue that we started talking about with the show today. It's like you're paying people not to go to work so that they can stay healthy and they can still take care of their families as well. So it's you're making a mountain out of a molehill, but they successfully managed to do that. Because again, look now. The $1,200 checks were shot down earlier today. One of the senators, Ron Johnson, basically said we're not doing it because of the deficit bills. Meanwhile,
the deficit hots are back again, right?
Of course, every time Democrats get into power, we don't have the money, But as soon as the next Republican, when Tom Cotton wins the election in 2028, we have all this money to give a $1 trillion tax cut. So it's so hypocritical. It's the fact that they just kind of refuse to. There's just it's a complete and total lack of empathy, I would say, for the people that are in their states. You don't have to. It's not like all rich people just live in one state. There are poor people in Wisconsin that Senator Johnson should be speaking to. Poor people in Arkansas that Senator Cotton should be standing up for. Both senators from Florida, they should be stepping up and trying to do what they can for their citizens who are struggling right now. When Walt Disney World lays off thousands of employees and they're a huge employer in Florida, you should be doing something to make sure those people are taken care of. And they're not doing it, and they're just kind of continually dropping the ball.
Yeah, no, they are doing it for those people. They're giving the companies liability protections, or that's what they're advocating for.
I think that got dropped last second.
Did get dropped. Yeah, they got. Yeah. So let's talk.
They were fighting very hard for that, though.
No. Yeah, so they are fighting very hard for liability protections, and they're also fighting very hard not to include giving money to states and cities to help them with their budget deficits as a result of the coronavirus. Which is a nasty thing to think about, because, if you want to talk about defunding the police, this is legitimately defunding the police.
This is what it looks like. This is exactly what it looks like.
Right? This is legit, because if they can't, if think of Philadelphia, for example, if they don't have enough money to fund their police department, they're going to defund it. New York City decided to cut funding from their police department, not because they wanted to, they had to due to COVID. So if you want to talk about defunding the police, this is exactly what it is right now. But also,
I also feel like with the $1,200, it was a joke, and so this is just even more. This is even more of a bigger joke, but the joke's on us. That's what I'm saying.
We're the ones who lose.
This is not a joke. This is a last minute campaign push for the two senators in Georgia.
Yes, it
That's
is.
what it is.
Yes,
Mitch
that's exactly what it
McConnell
is.
only caved to the $600 checks because he realized, I can't remember the exact quote, but he realized that people in Georgia are hurting. Oh my God. And like, because like he needed those two Senate seats in order to maintain the majority in the Senate,
Hmm.
he pushed for the $600 payments. So low key, we are funding a last second campaign push. Like we as taxpayers are funding a last second campaign push for the
Nasty.
two crooked senators in Georgia. That's what we're
Nasty.
doing.
You know what you never hear about when we have the deficit hawks come out, especially on the Republican side. You never hear about them taking a pay cut. I forget what the Senate what the salary is for senators, but I'm pretty sure it's over $100,000 a year. And
No,
you
no,
never hear
no.
about them foregoing those funds.
So they get paid that, and I think they get stipends for a lot of other things as well too. So like they don't.
Basically, they're rich
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think 57 senators are millionaires. I think
right.
I read that earlier this week. So yeah, they're not hurting. They could easily pass up that money.
Right?
They can or they can. I don't know. Maybe they're giving it to their staffs or something. I'm pretty sure they're not, but
No.
they can
Even
pass
their
along that
staffs are
money.
underpaid.
Their staffs are
Yeah.
crazy underpaid. That's why they live like paupers from what I understand. But no,
Yeah.
Interns don't get paid.
no unpaid internships are very popular on the
Yep.
Hill.
Unpaid internships are slavery.
There's bipartisan support for unpaid internships on the
No,
Hill.
there is. I think it was like a headline that AOC actually like, paid her staff like a decent
Hmm.
wage, which is
Yeah.
a nuts headline when you actually think about it. It's like I thought everyone
So
would do this.
radical. And so she's just so radical and she pays her staff in a decent way. Like it's just I said this earlier in the week and I feel like a lot of people look at like I don't know why, but a lot of people, especially like people in this country, are so brainwashed by capitalism that you think that the government giving you $600 is them helping you when they could give
Yeah.
you so much more. It's like, I don't know why we have led ourselves to believe that if the government, like literally the government is in place to help you. So them helping you, you don't applaud a fish for swimming. They're literally doing the bare minimum of what they're supposed to be doing, and we are like, oh my gosh, like if you look at like all the other major countries, this is like it's pennies compared to what other countries
Yeah,
are
right.
giving their citizens, and it's like it's
100%.
insulting. It's so insulting, and it's sad that a lot of people don't even realize how insulting that this really is, because if you do the numbers, the math is not mathing. If you do the numbers, you were given $1,800 to last you 9 months. That's like most people, what do they make that in like what, a month?
Yeah.
$600 a month.
No, like $1,800. Like they make that what in 2 months?
And
Like
like
working minimum wage.
you also got to think about it too. So the New York Times, their podcast, The Daily, kind of highlighted this single mom in Georgia, and basically like Congress didn't help out people who are renting, for example. So if you
They
lost
didn't.
like your job, right? What Congress did is like, well, you can't get evicted until this point. But like, what about your back rent,
You have
right?
to
So
pay
like,
the
if
Yeah.
you still got to pay the back rent, and as soon as like that eviction lapse period ends, like you can get kicked
You
out of
be
your
evicted
house.
immediately.
Right. So like we're kind of like just like kicking the can down the road of like lots of people becoming homeless over this.
Hmm.
And again, we are the richest, most powerful nation in the world. We still have troops in Afghanistan, Iraq, all
But we're
over the
behaving
world.
like a third world. It's so funny to me
Right.
because America wants to throw around this word third world country, and we talk so much shit about other countries and da 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 da, but yet we're behaving like one. We're
Right.
acting like one, and it's sad because again, I say this all the time, it's us that suffers. Like they're gonna go home and probably laugh about it, like just
Mhm.
laugh with each other on the phone, like yeah, we gave them $600, that's good enough, like fuck them. They don't care. And the rest of us, like you're struggling to pay like um a lot of like some people have been able, depending on like your circumstances, have been able to kind of like have a back pay situation where you don't have any like fees occurring or anything until like a period ends. But then at the same time, think about it, like when all this is over and you have back rent, you're now faced with the task of paying this and you don't have any money. You don't have the money now. You're not gonna have the money then. So it's just
Right.
it's a never-ending cycle of, again, the average working person, the working class people being exploited and disregarded.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
for sure.
it's so I just like to go back on your conversation like a couple seconds ago. So I just quickly Googled like the wealth in Congress, and like most people in Congress, majority of people in Congress are millionaires. Like that's just like a shocking idea
Right.
to know that a lot, and the crazy thing is that a lot of people in Congress didn't come in wealthy. Like Roy Blunt, wealth rose from 602,000 to 10.7 million over the last decade.
That's
Like,
nasty.
The precious senator
I wonder
that
why.
currently, the precious senator David
That's
Perdue, who is
nasty.
currently
I wonder
fighting
why.
to keep his seat, literally profited off COVID, because he was like, so it's like they're literally profiting off of your struggle. The same thing that has, further put you into debt, because a lot of people were already in debt, already struggling. They've profited from it. They've gotten richer, actually. A lot of some of them have actually gotten richer, while the rest of us, have spent the last, year almost struggling to figure out like how I'm gonna take care of myself. How is my family gonna be okay? Like what's gonna happen to my small business? What's gonna happen to my job? They're like, okay, we're fine. So that's just another way to put it into perspective. The people that you call on to help you are getting richer while you're simultaneously getting poorer, falling further and further into poverty.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. And like, I just got to add this one little bit. This is our last thing for the Congress segment. But Elizabeth Warren, senator out of Massachusetts, so she reintroduced, meaning she's brought this up again, legislation that would ban Congress people from trading while in office. So this is part of her broader plan to end corruption in government. Obviously, we know this doesn't get rejected, but this is something that should have been like, this should be common sense. Like, yes, no, you should not be trading as a congressperson. You can get high level information from these businesses or from whatever, and you can trade on that, as Senator Perdue has done in Georgia. I think he's like the most active trader in Congress. So it's pretty nuts that like you can get away with that. That's insider trading, and it's completely legal, or at least like we don't care enough about it that they can continue to do that. This is absolutely disgusting to see.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so let me just add this one little bit, and then we can just wrap it up for the holidays. So I think like 2 weeks ago in India, there was about 250 million people that staged one of the largest strikes in history. They were protesting. There were mostly farmers and farmer workers in India that were protesting for like this, better wages, better help for the government against like corporations and stuff like that. So this want to give a special shout out to those people, because if you're a worker, fight for your rights. This is the largest strike and protest. So definitely shouts out to them. And that is all I got for the podcast. I just want to remind our listeners, well, one, thank our listeners for sticking with us for 14 episodes.
Yes.
2, a special thank you to Ryan here for being our special guy for 2 weeks in a row.
Bob, man, I'm here.
3, special shout out to Carly for being our new co-host here. So shout out to Carly. Yeah. Thank you for that. And then 4, we are taking a break. We need a break. It's Christmas time. We're not getting paid from this, so we got to do our Christmas shopping. We just kind of want to get back, reset a little bit, find some good positive news, and then we're going to get back to the swing of things in January 10th. So hopefully we'll have like 2 senators or Democrats in Georgia. We can actually start getting some like good news out of Congress. We keep shitting on Congress a lot, so.
Hopefully no funny business with the Electoral College on January 6th. If we can avoid, if we can have good news from on the 5th and the 6th, it'll make the pod, it'll probably make the pod on the 10th a little boring, to be honest, but it will be in a better mood for sure.
So if the Electoral Congress decides to elect Trump as president, what do you think is going to happen? This is like my last topic. What do you think is going to happen if the Electoral College actually
Civil War?
Yeah.
A lot of angry tweets.
Yes.
And then we'll go
Civil
back to our
war.
brunches.
No,
I agree with
Honestly,
I don't
Marcus.
think it's that easy.
I think it would probably be, for me, it would probably be the most like what kind of moment for me like ever, because I joke and say that Biden has won the presidency like 10 times by now, so it's kind of like it's a running joke. So and then they voted him like last week, and so for them to turn around and it's like, well, never mind, it would just be like, it would be very devastating. I will say that. I don't know. I don't think I could survive another 4
Give
years.
me liberty or give me death.
Right.
If they voted, that would be my motto.
So Ryan, I don't know about you, but will be moving to Barbados.
Back to Barbados.
I'm just gonna wait it out there and see what happens, because I am
even
not
blame
getting no
I'm an
civil
agent
war.
of chaos, so I will stay here.
You're gonna stay.
I'll be staying here.
You might have to relocate the entire What You Expect team to Barbados or offshore.
Speaking of which, you can sign up for a year-long visa in Barbados, so you can do that. So we can relocate to What You Expect team over there.
A year's not long enough.
That is also a good point, Carly. Well, their immigration enforcement is not that strong. You guys are Americans. They're not going to kick you out. So
right. Okay.
that might be an option now.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'll check the prime minister send me a tweet like, hey, what are you doing? All right, guys. Again, thank you to our listeners. Thank you to Ryan. Thank you to Carly for this being a very special addition to our podcast. We are out. We'll be back January 10th. All right. Peace, guys.